a proud member of the Earglue Media family of podcasts.
We are the Film Appraisers, and we're here to make you think about movies and stuff. 1, 2, 3, 4.
All right, it's time again for another episode of the Film Appraisers, the podcast that evaluates your favorite films. Each episode, we discuss a film brought to us by a listener or a guest, and then we appraise it. We see how much it's worth in each of the following categories: narrative, music, technique, uniqueness, and longevity. Each of those categories can receive a maximum of $20,000 for a possible $100,000 for the most valuable film. And then we see where it stands next to the classics and other films brought to us by guests or listeners. It's a really interesting process. My name is Josh, and today we bring back a friend of the show to talk about a film that, surprisingly, the feedback that I got from people this week was that they've never seen this film. Be that as it may, it's one that I really enjoy, and I really do appreciate it. The third film from director Edgar Wright, adapted from the wildly famous graphic novel. Today we're discussing Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, starring Michael Cera, Mary Elizabeth Winstead, Ellen Wong, Kieran Culkin, Anna Kendrick, Jason Schwartzman, a ton of actors that were up and coming in Hollywood in 2010 when they released this film. This action, fantasy, comedy. This thing's all over the place, but it's good. It's worth it. We'll get into all of that later. This is episode 31, Romance, Battle, and Exes. Now, joining us on the journey today, if his life had a face, I would never punch it. I would give it a big old smooch. It's Joe Caton.
Evacuate the city, engage all defenses, and somebody get this man his skateboard. I loved this movie.
Yeah, this is your first time to see it, right?
Yeah, the first four times I saw it.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. So, did you get to talk with Todd? Does Todd get to watch it?
I got in touch with Todd this morning, and Todd got caught absolutely facing a family-sized order of beef bulgogi by the vegan police. He's probably not going to make it, but on the plus side, he got to meet Thomas Jane.
Hey, there you go. All right, well, before we get to introduce today's guest, Joe, I want to mention something we talked about in our last episode. Our Patreon page is officially up and running, and we actually have a few subscribers.
Yeah, we're both overwhelmingly pleased with the initial uptake on the Patreon. It means a lot to us. I mean, it definitely helps keep the lights on and all that, and we really appreciate it. Especially, we had some friends of the site show, Cab and T-Flu, who you've definitely all heard us mention before. They jumped on minutes, minutes from the last episode dropping, and it's super appreciated.
Yeah, we certainly thank Cab and Terrence, Connor and Terrence, for their contribution. We were really, truly humbled that you would support the show. So thank you guys for that. But the reason that we're here today is due to one man, a guy that brought us Scott Pilgrim to appraise. He's the host of 20 Minutes of Truth podcast, Mr. Colin True. Colin, it is great to have you back on the show.
It is great to be back, boys. Really happy to hear your voices. I think the last time we spoke, we weren't in quarantine yet, but we were a few weeks away. So
getting close.
I feel like that was the beginning of the turn in the dark, and now we're back again to bring the world back into the light. That's what we're here to do today, everybody.
I sincerely hope so.
Colin, when I posted online the album, the Scott Pilgrim versus the World album that I got, I posted that on our social media site. It was surprised that it was 10 years old and it was now eligible to be appraised based on the kind of the rules of our show. You responded really quick, stating that you wanted to be on the show and appraise it. Why Scott Pilgrim? What is that film? Its importance to you?
It's funny. I wrote down a whole bunch of stuff. This is probably my favorite movie that I never talk about when talking about my favorite movies.
Yeah.
And I think after my kind of, Joe, you said you had 4 watches of it since your first time in the last week. And I, when we did High Fidelity, it was really fun to rewatch that one. And then I kind of watched it a second time just to make sure I was kind of boned up. I had no problem putting this movie on every day this week. I have it actually on with the volume off in the background.
We
right
both
now.
do also.
We all three do.
Yeah. And it's Brian O'Malley and Edgar Wright. I really feel like they pulled a Marvel while the MCU was in its infancy 10 years ago in terms of like taking the source material and letting it just dictate what it should be. And I think that shows as why it kind of has gained steam over time. And I guess it can be looked at. I don't know the number specifically. I'm sure, Josh, you're going to hop into that. But it's like, I don't think it was a wild success when it came out. But and the other thing about this movie is like when I think of the technical know-how needed to make a motion picture, it really gets overwhelming at times. When I watch this movie, I mean, it breaks my brain for how many little details needed to be considered, however they storyboarded it, whatever it was. Then they had to shoot it a certain way, edit it a certain way, and then finish it in post. I mean, I don't think it's as overwhelming as even something like an Avengers Endgame, where, I think about what that movie was. This is just such a special film, and the narrative is like, it's simple and it's complex at the same time. And I don't know. I mean, can you guys think of another movie that is remotely like this one? I really do feel like it's a bit of a unicorn in the film world. It's such a great flick. It's so fun.
I mean, it really made an impression on me. I mean, like I said, like the first time I watched it, like a week ago, right? And I didn't know what I was in. So this is one of those films, right, that as somebody who had never seen it before, I had heard mentioned a ton of times. It obviously had like some reverence behind it. It was an absolute box office flop. It didn't even get half its budget back. Yeah. But it made that like nostalgia cult favorite kind of category. People talk about it all the time. You see like the fanboys crushing hard on Ramona everywhere. That's like a super common, if you watch Comic-Con, or if you like watch coverage of Comic-Con and stuff, with the Ramona cosplays are like a popular thing. Like that stuff is all over the place. And it was one of those blind spots that like, I don't know why I never saw it. I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was like if I was going through like a not really digging Michael Cera phase or something. I'm not really sure. But I mean, we're talking about like a film that is full of indie rock, set with like heavily laden with video game and comic book references, full of soon-to-be superheroes, like all over the place, right? Lots of sweet action, like fighting games, stuff like that. It is basically purpose-built to check all of my boxes. And I just never saw it. I have no idea.
You are the target audience.
Yeah, I am the exact target audience. Like it really surprised me what it was, because I think in my head it was a like cheesy kind of nothing of a film. Like this was kind of the era where they were pumping out like a lot of these middling comedies, and I think I just put it in that category. And I was like, I'll get to it eventually. But this is special. This is not that.
Yeah, for sure. So if anyone's listening and they're unfamiliar with Scott Pilgrim versus the World, I'll give you a bit of the log line from IMDb. The log line is, in a magically realistic version of Toronto, a young man must defeat his new girlfriend's 7 evil exes one by one in order to win her heart. That doesn't even, so we say a lot of times we read the log line and it's exactly what it is. That doesn't even begin to explain this film. That tells you the premise of the film, but we can't tell you everything that's in this. It's just so complicated and layered and detailed, and this is going to be a challenging one, honestly, to be able to talk about. And you guys mentioned about the graphic novel version of it. We saw a little bit, if you remember, with like Into the Spider-Verse, of having like a successful transition of comic book into a film, but this is a graphic novel, which, maybe only slightly different from traditional superhero comics, but I think that transition from graphic novel to film is probably the best I've ever seen anybody do it. And I don't know if anybody other than Edgar Wright could probably handle that.
No, and I think realistically looking at this, if I were to, I think Into Spider-Verse overall is, even breaking down by category here, probably a better film in its totality. Yeah. That movie really affects me in like an emotional level as well as an enjoying level. But I think even still in that nature, I think the direct translation of comic or graphic novel, either way, to film is better here. I don't think I've ever seen it done here. This feels like being in a video game, or I had this in my notes on like 5 different spots, because they do things that like in like 5 different areas here that like genuinely surprised me the first time I watched it. This feels like, so like there's so many movies where a character gets sucked into a video game or into a comic or into a movie or something, and then instead of treating it like they got brought into a game, they pretend the world inside the game is like a real world, like a different dimension, right? They don't try to include the trappings. You don't feel at any point in that like you are in a video game. You feel like you're just watching a movie inside a movie or whatever, right? Yeah. This feels like they brought the video game, or in its totality, like graphic user interface, everything in its totality, to life in a really special way. I really dug it.
Yeah, you mentioned the Edgar Wright component, which is, to me, the kind of funny thing about it. I was definitely aware of this movie. I didn't see it in the theater. I saw it at home, but I also liked it immediately. And I was an Edgar Wright fan. I wonder now, if, obviously now this is a different world. This gets released now, how well between Edgar Wright and what it is and where we've come with these types of movies, I think it would do infinitely better, obviously. But I think it's probably the best video game movie ever, even though its source material is a comic book. But in terms of the video game elements that are in it, I know that's not a really, category overflowing with quality entries, but it's also, I think you can make the case that it is this. I also think you can make the case, and I don't want to derail the podcast, but is this the best comic book movie ever? I think if you look at it, if you qualify it as, I wrote a list of my top 5, going back to High Fidelity, I guess, objective comic book movies, right? So if I was going to say to someone who doesn't watch them, here's where you should start watching comic book movies. I think you have like, The Dark Knight and Logan is sort of like, probably the top 2 is sort of like, this is what these films can be. And I'd probably have this at number 3 before like The Incredibles, and then maybe you include like Winter Soldier. But then if you back out DC and Marvel, if you take out the big houses and you just kind of go with these types of movies, my top 5 would probably be, this, The Incredibles, then something like Unbreakable, The Crow, and then you throw Chronicle and Dread or those kinds of movies in there. But I would have this, if someone said, I want to watch a comic book movie, I'd say, oh, you should start with Scott Pilgrim versus the World. Like, this is what it can be,
It's incredibly fun and like I would say like infinitely rewatchable. Like I really was impressed with what we got. I mean, everything. I mean, like maybe like start getting into it a little bit, like the stuff on screen. The whole thing on like the narrative section, I was really impressed with. I mean, they set the tone for the film accurately. Like I didn't know what I was in for. Like I said, I went into this blind. I especially when I haven't seen a film before, when I'm watching it for the first time for the show, I don't look up anything until after I've watched it the first time.
I'm so jealous you got to do that.
Right? I go in totally blind. I'll be honest with you. The first time I watched this, I didn't even know it was Edgar Wright. I had no knowledge at all about this film. I went into this totally blind, and the Universal logo set the tone for me. I was like, this is going to be great. I'm going to love this. And then it took like 6 minutes into the film, and I was like, is this Edgar Wright? His style, I mean, like the hard cuts, super close-ups,
the crash zooms,
the crash zooms and stuff, right?
Totally.
I was like, is this Edgar Wright? I had to look it up. I was like, this can't be. How did I miss this? Because I've always loved Edgar Wright stuff. I mean, Shaun of the Dead and Hot Fuzz are like 2 of my like favorites. I quote them all the time, and I still watch them regularly, right? And I mean, there's a couple, like World's End is kind of, I don't know, it never didn't click with me. It's okay. It didn't click with me the same way, but
it's fine.
This, like, there is stuff here. And so I got that the Universal logo set the tone for me. And then like immediately, like probably within like 10 minutes of the film starting, I was like, oh, the cast in this is pretty great. And then it continued to escalate from there.
Right.
Yeah, has there ever been a filmmaker better suited to make a specific movie? I mean, he already does the quick cuts and everything anyway, right?
This was definitely like a perfect marriage of styles, of two styles, like of a director style and a source material style. And like everything, like we talked about, we all watched it a number of times this week. Like the pacing is so good that it never slogs, but it doesn't lose you either. Right, you can miss a ton of references and stuff, but the story never loses you. It's not like a film that's paced so fast you get lost and you just let it happen to you. Basically, you let it exert its will. It just keeps moving. It continues to effectively tell you the story, even though it's flying, and it does like really subtle things that I thought were really great. that are super easy to miss first time through. Like I didn't notice, what we were talking beforehand, Josh, about the Zelda through line in this.
Yeah.
And I didn't notice how intricate that was until like the third viewing. Like Neil's got that Game Boy playing Zelda pretty much throughout the whole film. And the music coming out of the Game Boy from Zelda matches the scene in universe. And it starts off at the very first scene with him at the table talking about knives. And when he starts describing knives, the music changes to the opening a treasure chest sound effect. And then it goes on later where the music is in universe. And then as Scott walks away, it turns into non-diegetic music, and it goes from like 8-bit to symphonic version of it. And music continues to match the scene. It's when Scott's going to go to the bathroom or whatever, and they're playing the music from the caves that the fairies are in where you heal up, right? And then you get the apartment that they're living in there is set up to look like the front of the entrance to the cave. You get the dangerous to go alone cave.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And then Gideon, the main bad guy, his initials are all over the place, and they're arranged the 3 G's into the Triforce.
Yes.
Like I don't know anything about Zeldas. Yeah. This is amazing to me, given how many times I had no idea that was that deep. There's incredible. There's this incredible deep Zelda, and it's just like one of many really carefully plotted through lines that connect all the way through this film. It's the start of each fight when they the fighters line up and it gives you the fight logo. Each fight has a different style of character on character, and it is aped from a different fighting game throughout the whole thing. Like Mortal Kombat's in there and Street Fighter's in there. Like they That's crazy.
Purposefully matched the select your fighters screen from different games the whole way through. Like there's just these details everywhere that you can miss.
Well, that's interesting because I think the cynical side of me with a lot of these types of movies is it always describes it as, these things are riddled with plot holes, and it's if you can look past them in the initial viewings, it's a success, right? It's like in The Dark Knight, it's pretty convenient that the dude blows up and the only one left standing in the police precinct is the Joker, right? Or in Winter Soldier,
right.
Nick Fury's up in the car upside down. Boy, he managed to cut through that road pretty quick as the Winter Soldier was walking. But you're so into the movie the first time you watch it, you don't even really notice it, and it's on repeat viewings that all these things come out, and you forgive them as you go. This movie, I'm not kidding. I was laughing out loud at little lines and little subtle things, and not even to the level of detail you were just describing, Josh. But it's fun to pick a character, and anytime Alison Pill, as Kim is on screen, just watch her.
She
watch
makes me
what
laugh
she does, and everything
she said made me laugh.
I mean, Kieran Culkin as Wallace. And it's ridiculous how every time I never get bored with this movie. The only bad thing I can really say is by the end you feel a little exhausted but I also don't know. It also feels like that completely serves the story that it kind of ramps up to that last fight the way it does too.
Yeah.
So it's not even like a real criticism, It's this is one of those you can put it on and you not only just enjoy it every time, but you probably see something you didn't see before. It's pretty special.
So let's merge a little bit into the rating portion of this show and talk about narrative, because what you guys both said all fall into that category, right? We say narrative is our mise en scène, anything that you see on the screen, whether it's those little details that you're finding, all the way up to the acting or the lighting or the sets, the locations, and the story and the plot. All of that falls into that category for narrative. And I do agree with you. There's so many little details. I think there's something with the length, because when you get there towards the end, I agree with what you said. When you get towards the end, it starts feeling like it's a little long, but I love it when we get those numerical aspects to narratives where you have kind of a countdown in the film going on,
right.
Whether it's always bringing you to this conclusion. I think this film, if there's any negative that I'm going to say, at least as far as the narrative, I think it's a tad too long. Because once you're watching it and you're exhausted by the end, and then they do the Nega Scott, and you think, oh, come on, just wrap this up already. But then they do, so it's okay. They solve that problem. But I would agree, if I was going to harp on a little bit, I don't know where you would cut though. It may be something in the exposition up to the first fight, but I can't. I find it difficult to cut some things out of this.
It feels like the way they have the the way they replay it, where he loses the Gideon and then they replay it. I mean, that is, because I'm with you. Like, that's where I start to feel it, and then you get to the point where then he's just beating up Gideon, and you're kind of like, but I don't know. Usually, you're like, well, you could lose 10 minutes here. I can't tell you where I would take out 10 minutes where I wouldn't feel like you're really losing something. That's the hard part about it. But I do agree with you. That's kind of where I do feel a little ground down by that moment, but that's like the only bad thing I could say.
Right.
Yeah. I think I think you probably could have cumulatively trimmed a few minutes out of the movie by cutting a little bit out of each of the Evil X fights. Some of the, each one of those scenes is probably, right now, even though I think it's hilarious, on my screen right now, they're doing the vegan battle, which is so fun.
I love it so much.
But vegan Superman here doesn't necessarily need to pick up Scott and throw him through a wall 4 times. It could have been 2.
That's true.
And you do a little bit here and there like that, you might be able to trim a little bit out, but that's so nitpicky, as far as overall, because even at that spot towards the end of that Gideon fight where it starts to feel like it's running long, I actually think that maybe plays in well, because it starts to feel like a little like it's beating you down a little bit right as Scott is in a desperate position, and then he wins the fight, and like you said, Nigga Scott comes out and he just plans a coffee date and leaves, right? They wrap it up so fast. It's almost, you start to feel that there's more of this at the same time Scott does, right?
Yeah. And that's a good point. Yeah.
So you could maybe trim that up a little bit, but I think that may actually be a little intentional, or at least it lined up well.
You could actually pull out the first encounter between him and the female ex.
Roxy. I was
Roxy.
That was the one I went
because
to.
he doesn't realize that's an ex at that point.
Right.
The realization comes later. So you could probably pull that out. But I mean, hey, it's taken us 10 minutes to figure out, figure out what to pull out of here. I've got 3 things basically on the narrative that I'll point out. I think with the acting, I don't think there's any bad acting in this film whatsoever. I will say, though, that if you are considering watching this and you're not a Michael Cera fan, you're probably going to want to pass on this one, because it's his humor and his mannerisms throughout.
See, he's grown on me. I remember not liking him as much the first time I watched this, and I feel like he gets better on repeat. Maybe it's I understand the character better or whatever. But I agree. You definitely, if he bothers you, it's a lot of Michael Cera.
I think it's I think for me, it's a saturation thing. I think at this point, you go back to mid to late 2000s. There was so much, and especially I was just getting out of high school, kind of 2005-ish, when these movies were hitting their stride, and it was everywhere, and everybody was talking about it, and I just didn't want to ever see him or Jonah Hill in anything ever again, right?
Right.
It was the two of them were everywhere, and I think that's probably why I ended up actually missing this, because I was just overdone with it. Yeah. But there's really not much of either of them right now. So when they do show up, there's that saturation point isn't high like it was.
Yeah, that's fair. He was all over the place at that time.
On the acting, I really liked the acting in this. I especially love how hard into the stereotype personalities the Evil Exes laid, right? The whole Chris Evans thing with that super over the top tough guy voice and stuff was so funny to me. And then he breaks character for a half a second when he's like, "Oh, you didn't know about it? Cool." And then he punches him in the face and gets that dumb voice back again.
Yeah.
I'm going for the Oscar this year.
I'm going for the Oscar this year.
Like it's an award you can earn, by scoring the right amount of points.
Yeah. Right? He's gonna muscle his way to the Oscar.
And they're all super over the top, but just like I said I'm pretty sure 2 of the last 5 movies we've done because of what we've been watching. Maybe not your classic definition of award-winning textbook kind of acting, but it's what the film needed. Like we say with Chris Evans, that character would not be anywhere near as good as it was, or funny, if he wasn't such an over-the-top caricature of that character he was playing, right? If he was just normal voice and wasn't laying on that like unnecessary attitude and stuff, it wouldn't have landed the same.
Yeah.
Well, in Aubrey Plaza, right? I mean, this is pre-Parks and Rec, and she is, even if you watch some of the movies she's done since Parks and Rec, she kind of has a little of that April Ludgate going on in a lot of her roles, but this was very different, and she's so funny. I love how she just abuses Scott in this.
Yeah, I have
and then,
her,
oh, go ahead.
I have her and Alison Pill both called out specifically for making me laugh so much in this. Like, I laughed so much. Alison Pill, especially, her like really dry, sarcastic humor,
she's great.
Was just fantastic. I laughed so much. The only thing I laughed harder at than those two was what did he say? Like, you smacked the highlights out of her hair.
Young Neil.
Yeah, that slayed me.
It was like his most dramatic line too.
The way he said it, like he screamed it, and then like they panned down to her, and the blue's gone. I actually spit my whiskey up. I was like,
that's good.
Well, you know what I learned last night? Who's in this movie? I had no idea. Do you know who did the narration for all the voiceover parts?
Yeah, it's Bill Hader, right?
Bill Hader.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's still on SNL at the time.
Interesting. Yeah.
And now it's like,
really
I love it even more. And I loved the voiceover parts. The whole, every time that voice would kick in to kind of give you a little bit of information about like Scott's past or whatever. It was always funny. Now it's like, oh my God, it's Bill Hader. Even better, right?
That is great.
Sorry.
So yeah,
Sorry,
attention
Josh, derailing your narrative.
No, attention to detail. That's exactly what this
everywhere.
is. It's all the attention to detail. And I'll tell you right now, hey Joe, I landed at 13.5, and what got me there for narrative was a couple of things. Well, what pulled me down was what I've already talked about. I think the art direction in this film makes it very easy to watch, very cohesive, very well developed throughout the film. So the art director deserves a lot of credit for that. The main thing here, all right, we're talking narrative, so it's story and plot that really drives a portion of this appraisal. Again, it's constructed well. It's easy to follow. Maybe the exposition's a little long, but that's all right. I don't have any problem with that. And then, like I said, I don't know where you can cut. I think as far as the theme, though, and it's going to sound like I'm going one way, but I'm headed into the right direction. I think as far as the theme, it's not going to challenge any kind of deep human concepts or, but we ain't talking about William Faulkner here. It's about, they're going to talk about what's doing right, acting like an adult, self-confidence, love. There's some pretty basic themes here. But for a film like this, we don't have to have anything complicated. Sometimes films are just made to be fun. One of my favorite lines from the Johnny Depp version of, so I can't stop laughing when I'm watching this off to the side. And that's what this film does. It like distracts me. It took me so long to write notes on this thing because I just caught myself just watching it and I didn't want to write notes. But one of my favorite lines from the Johnny Depp version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is someone tells Willy Wonka, like, this doesn't make any sense. And Charlie butts in and says, well, it's candy. It doesn't have to make sense. And that makes me think of this. So it might not do like the best in the narrative category for the subtopic of story and plot, but that doesn't mean this is not a lot of fun. I think this film is a lot of fun and I had a blast with it. And for all those reasons, that's where I landed, Joe, 13.5.
I came in a little bit higher. I came in at 14. I think I gave a little more credit to the narrative in a couple of places than you did. I think as any good story does, it does an excellent job setting up later elements, foreshadowing way ahead of time in a lot of different places. Even little, I don't want to say little things, but even as early as like Scott and Knives playing that team up fighting game, which not only explains why Scott can fight, but also sets up that last fight where they do the combo fighting and stuff. And you also get in that game, you get the Nega Ninja, which sets up Nega Scott, right? So there's
which is self-confidence, right? He's got to battle himself. Yeah,
exactly. I also think that, like you said, this is like kind of like a cut and dry kind of story, like you mentioned, but I do think I gave it a little more credit because I think it was a kind of a fun, what's what I'm looking for. It was an effective and kind of original way to present, so basically, right, this is a fun comic booky action film that is also a romantic comedy. It is about a relationship at its beginning, right? And in your typical romantic comedy, you like the drama involved between the two main characters is all the emotional baggage and things, the traumas and things that each person has lived through prior to, and having to learn to accept those. Or, I mean, that is a very human thing, to learn to accept those or to heal, whatever it might be. And I think it's kind of awesome the way they presented those traumas as like actual physical fights with the exes, right? Instead of long conversations or blowout fights like you would normally get in that kind of movie, you get like a real fight, and each ex has a different kind of energy and baggage attached to it, right? So I think that was kind of a really clever way to handle that. So I came a little bit higher, came in 14. I think they did a really good job with those things in particular.
Yeah, we're really, really close there. I'm gonna call it 13,750 unless Colin here convinces me otherwise.
Well, as you know, I fight vociferously for the movies that bring you boys.
I will say this: that is my lowest category.
Yeah, mine as well.
And all kidding aside, I was trying to kind of go through and plug in. And I'll admit I probably was a little overly high on High Fidelity. As I re-listened to our episode, I probably was fighting some fights. I'm like, okay, I could see your point of view with some distance, taking the anger out of it. Although, when you have two guys with a movie podcast but don't clearly like movies, I don't understand, obviously. But I had it a little higher, and it's only because this is where it's that gray area for me when you talk narrative, and you guys tried to explain it to me before, but it's like there's really only a handful of stories that get told in any movie. And so for me, it's like, how do you tell the story? It's okay. At its most basic, if you said sum it up as a category, you'd probably say, okay, I guess it's a romantic comedy or a comic book movie. And then from there, what other movie though is like this? Now that might be stepping on uniqueness. And hey, if we get like to a perfect score in uniqueness, and I'll retract all of my pushbacks and narrative. But I wrote down 15, so I was actually closer probably on any close, category that I was. Simply because of kind of the same thing you guys said.
Well, it's also important to know. I think this is a thing. This is a thing that I think every guest, not just you, every guest gets wrapped up on, is that like 14. 15 are really high scores in this category, right? Like if you start looking at films over 14 or 15 in any category, right? You start looking at films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, It's a Wonderful Life, Psycho, like films that are like historically big films, right? It's like 14, 15, super high score in any category. Very few films make it to there. Like, we pull some of the films we've had for guest films, like our what's our highest rated guest film right now? Let me pull that list up right now.
It's Titanic, I think.
It's no, it's
there's no guest.
Goodfellas is our highest rated guest film right now. I should have known that because that was my pick.
Yeah, that's right.
It's our highest rated guest film right now, and I think it also might be our highest rated narrative in any film we've done so far. Yeah, it is. It's our highest rated guest film in narrative too, and that was 18.5. And there's like 2 other films above 16, and then the rest of them are all 16 and under.
Yeah, your top 10 is an average of 18. So you gotta be really high, and that's talking like the greatest.
No, I
of
get
all
it,
time.
and I think honestly, like a year's worth of movies, and you guys talk about it, it makes a little bit more sense. I got my film appraisers, Little Orphan Annie, Dakota Rings. Now I understand how you guys.
Be
go
sure
about
to drink your Ovaltine.
Ovaltine.
I did. A stinking commercial. But yeah, no, I think, that it is, but then kind of going through it, and again, having listened to our last episode and where you guys have gone through it, and then look at the other categories, I like you said, this being the lowest, that makes sense to me. Like when you get into the technique, music, uniqueness, longevity, I feel like I would be surprised if it wasn't higher, knowing just how I know how you guys do evaluate the films. So I've said my piece. I'm ready. I'm ready to move on when you guys are.
Well, so we'll do 13,750 in a easy category to appraise. Very easy category to appraise. Let's talk a little bit about music. Joe, what were your thoughts on the music for this?
Okay, I'm going to have to pare some of this down because I have a lot of thoughts about the music in this. First, I loved everything about the music in this. I think it was incredibly smart, like I said before, to get a different band to kind of voice each band in the movie so they have distinct feels to them, instead of like, which we've definitely all seen before, original music kind of films where you can tell that one composer wrote all the band's music, right? Even though they're different, you can tell. I think everything was really well chosen for the film. I think it all fits the mood and attitude really well. I think there is some amazing use of, like I said, like those transitions from diegetic to non-diegetic music within it are just so good and so effective. And the through lines with like the Zelda themes and there's a couple other games and fighting games and whatever that make sort of impactful appearances here and there. Really great. I mean, a lot of the music is licensed. You look at licensed music, it's a little bit less weighty than original score stuff, but the original score stuff in this is really good. I think Beck was a great Beck did the Sex Bob-omb music. He was a great choice for that. Also, Sex Bob-omb, awesome band name.
Great reference, yeah.
Great reference, killer band name. I really liked the music in this, and I think like I said, straight from the beginning, the treatment on the Universal logo, I mean, not just the visual style, but the like chiptune 8-bit style that went with it. Great.
It was a great hook. It was a great hook for this film. It reminded me of on the Simpsons movie where they had Ralph do the fanfare for 20th Century Fox.
Yeah.
And that's the hook that film needed also. And this did the same thing with that introduction music.
Yeah, exactly. It set the tone immediately, and there are some real bangers in this thing. I really like the music in this. I came in. I mean, if every song in this was original and it was like this great, I probably would have come in higher because that would have been quite the feat. But as it was, I still think it was really impressive. I came in at 15.
Okay. Yeah, I know exactly what you're saying. I was at 15.5, and there's a lot of reasons why. I think, first of all, Nigel Godrich, the score he put together was perfect. I don't know if you guys have seen what Johnny Greenwood from Radiohead does with the films that he does the score. This is in that same vein. Nigel Godrich does a same style like he does, and rightfully so. He's the producer for almost all of Radiohead's albums. And I love what you said, the music choices of the bands they picked to do this film. The Black Lips, Beck, Broken Social Scene is in there. Like, there's some really great choices. And even when they choose to add a song that I think most general audience members would recognize, Under My Thumb by the Rolling Stones, is perfectly placed. And the volume of that song rises at key shots, and then it quiets back down, just like you said with the Zelda stuff. Not to jump in while you're talking to bands, I love that they used metric for for Clash of Demon Head.
Demon Head. I love metric, so I thought that was a great pull. But I also love that they styled Brie Larson both visually and behaviorally after metric. They did a really great job. Right. It was like watching metric, sort of like watching metric do a little live show. I thought that was a really great touch.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's exactly right. I was worried rewatching this that when I started analyzing music, that it would fall into a bit of like the Clerks situation where we felt like the director was really just selecting the songs he likes, but that's not the case here. No, that's definitely not the case here.
Clerks was the director's playlist. These songs are definitely purpose picked.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very specific with one sound.
I'm pretty sure the Clerks that they didn't, because obviously he didn't have any music when he was making that cheap old movie, right? But they kind of like the studio was like, here are songs you can put into it, is kind of almost the way it happened. Whereas this was obviously well thought out. I think Edgar Wright is putting on a clinic, just of like how you use not only music but a sound in a movie. And he does it in a lot of his movies.
There is some fantastic sound in this, like really, really fantastic sound work.
And some of it stems from the music too, right? And it's, I think to your point, like Josh, you're worried about how's it going to be, is it going to hold up a little bit? I think time will tell.
It would work today.
I don't think that 15 years from now, I think it will work. I just feel like the choices they made and how it's so woven into the story they're telling that I don't know. It's hard for me to see a time when the longevity is going to catch up to it. Specifically the music. Maybe there might be other things, but I think it's and it's obviously it's important to the story too, because even if you look at the original graphic novel, there's pages where guitar chords are actually drawn into the panels and things like that. So it's not even just like a good choice for the film, but it's part of the source material. And for me, that just makes it perfect. I don't know. So just devil's advocate, guys, you both said 15. I had it a little bit higher, but what would have made it perfect. Like nobody said anything yet that's been like it makes me feel like it should be lower. Like what do you think?
There is you score all original scores land higher, right? So like there's a lot of licensed music in this, and while it's definitely chosen well, I think we tend to reward original film scores a little more.
There's original score in this.
There is some original score. Yeah.
I'll tell you what keeps it from being probably higher than 16 is, can you walk up to anybody on the street and hum something from this and they go, "Oh, I love Scott Pilgrim." Now, can you do that with Wizard of Oz or Toy Story?
Okay.
That's the difference, because we're starting to, when you get above 15,
that's a big hurdle to clear.
It's hard to get to 20. Yeah, there's nothing that transcends the movie to make this a pop culture icon.
At 15 in any category, 15 is like about as high as you can get before you need to be like
iconic. You have to be
really
iconic
super special. Yeah.
Yeah. And this movie at best is a cult classic at this point. So
yeah,
I think it's gaining steam as it goes, but it's probably even in the best case scenario, it's not going to get to there. That's a good point. I think that makes a lot of sense then. But it is just one of those. When I tell people about this movie, I'm like, just listen to the music too. From the opening scene, to your point, like when they start kicking into that first song and the credits. And by the way, nice throwback to actually showing the credits at the beginning of the movie, something that doesn't really happen anymore. And sometimes that's a chore when you're getting through it. You're like, okay, come on, let's get on with the film. I love watching the credits.
Yeah.
In Scott Pilgrim versus the World. So, and it's mostly because of the music though.
Yeah. If it's done well, opening credits are awesome.
Well, that's Edgar Wright's forte. His opening credits are the best. Go watch Baby Driver. Like his opening credits are so
Shaun of the Dead.
Good.
They're just it's so great.
He does that so well.
I just on Edgar Wright, he is. I know he has a style that I guess some people don't love. I don't know. I don't know how anybody cannot. But
I'm with you on that.
He is just. I can't believe he hasn't gotten more work.
Well,
right?
Yeah. Well, he's got something coming out.
He does have some stuff coming out, but like and not to say he hasn't gotten any work. But I'm just like, I'm surprised people aren't just throwing things at him, unless they are and he is just super selective or something. But his stuff is always so good. I don't know. I really like him.
I'm gonna hit
Hold on. I want to hit the pause button on Edgar Wright, because I've got a question for both of you guys in the after show, which if you're wondering what that is, new bonus content for our patrons. Will be the after show. And one of the things I want us to talk about is Edgar Wright and exactly where y'all are headed. So let's hold that thought, because I definitely want to get into that, because I think I feel the same way with you guys about Edgar Wright. I'm definitely fanboy there. All right, so if we're going to go music, if we split between us, Joe, it's like $250. So let's call music $15,250.
I'm sorry for laughing, but the part of the movie just came on screen where it said, the rocket, fun fact, this place is a toilet. That makes me laugh every single time.
That was really good. You know what the best part about that is that we all know that place and exactly what that means.
Oh, yeah.
Right? We know, you see that, this place is a toilet, you know exactly the place it is immediately.
So good.
Yeah, you know the name of your local rocket.
Yes, for sure. A couple of them, actually.
So, technique. All right, this is probably a 3-hour discussion if we wanted it to be. Technique is just, this thing just blossoms with technique.
I cut mine down into like bullet points basically because I had so much to say, and I mean, I'm sure you're going to get into a lot of it because I know this is your baby, so I'll let you go here in a second, but a lot of this stuff that I have here is Edgar Wright stuff, right? But I don't think there's a better film to have that stuff in it.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Like the little touches, like the little D while they're playing the bass.
Yeah, I love that stuff.
Verses that pops up on the fights and the P bar, all those little things like that. Yeah.
Even the sound lines coming off the drums when she's playing the drums, like little things like that.
I'm here for Josh too. This is what I want. I wanted to hear him break this down. The only thing kind of note I really had was I just love how the movie completely dictates what's happening visually. Like the one thing I wrote down was like when Scott breaks up with Knives and it's all, they're out, they're in the record store or whatever, but then immediately the entire background just goes black. Right. And it just like the mood is completely visually shown by what's actually happening in the story at any given moment. And that's kind of what I meant about how it breaks my brain to think about all of that ahead of time is just astounding to me. But
can you imagine being an actor and not having the full vision of what's in Edgar Wright's head while you're going through this? And then the first time you see it at the premiere, you're like, holy crap. I never believed that this was going to happen.
There's so much like aspect ratio changing in scenes.
How it narrows in the dream sequence.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's so much, there is like you said, with the background blacked out in that scene, or I even though it's a really small kind of funny touch, I actually really loved when he walked in on Ramona changing and covered his eyes and the screen went black.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Like the little things like that were like different levels of impactful, but they were everywhere, and I really liked it.
Yeah, even down to like the split screen on the phone calls. You know, that those are challenging to do in films because they're so tropey. But this one was done in a very hip way, and it doesn't linger on it too long. And then it cuts to another conversation, then back to one. That was handled pretty well.
It avoids getting cheesy or tropey in any of these scenes, like in a bad way in any of these scenes, because it throws so much style at them. And even I really liked the after the breakup scene where you get the scrolling shots of him and Knives and then him and Ramona.
Oh, it's like what he's thinking, right?
That's what
You're
he's thinking,
seeing his
right?
active thoughts.
And they're kind of framed in like subway window frames, sort of, right? Where he's on the train.
Because he's on the bus.
Yeah. Right, he's on the bus, yeah. And that's like, there's little stylistic flares on all that stuff that dramatically change the feel of what's happening. That they could have been disastrous, right? They could have been really detracting if they were not done correctly. Like right now we're just watching, I have the Gideon fights up on mine, and we just got like a very comic-y panel split of the screen where part of it was just zoomed in on Gideon's eyes and his glasses, and the rest of it was Scott, right? Like little things.
It's a comic panel right there. Yeah,
for sure, a comic panel, right? And you could make a comic panel really work or really not work, and it really works here.
Yeah. I could have put down a ton of things under camera, and I started to go that route, but I had to quit. And there's too much. You have to. So if somebody's going to go watch this, you just try to keep up with the special and the practical and the camera techniques. It's challenging. You're just going to have to trust our appraisal on this one and experience this on your own just to even understand what we're talking about. It's pretty remarkable. The
thing that this is one of the things Edgar Wright does a lot of that I thought was super effective here in the editing was the like jumps through time by camera angle change, right? Where like he's in the library and it zooms in on his face, and then the background doesn't really change, but then his bandmate yells in his ear and he's standing on the set.
Yes,
like that stuff. I love those jumps through time with just like a zoom in and a zoom out, like things like that.
Yeah,
with like
because he's in a daze, right?
Yeah, you get a bunch of those all in a row right there. You get a couple of them later also, but like I love that how effective that was and how seamless it was.
Yeah, question is asked, and then it's answered at the beginning of the next scene.
Right.
Through time.
It's like, multiple days have passed. Or
it's so good. It's really, really effective. And like I said, I have like 8 specific shots that I really liked that I started to keep. I was like, man, this shot's really good. This shot's really good. And then I just stopped. I was like, there's too many shots that I really like that I can't list 40 shots. The episode will go on forever. So
where did you end up landing with technique?
I was at 15.
Okay. Yeah, I'm the exact same number. We are hitting really close here.
Before you ask, to be higher than 15, Colin.
I like context. That's all.
Usually to get higher than 15, you have to, we look for stuff that changed something in the industry, something like revolutionary. We look at, like the introduction of Steadicam for the first time, something like that, where you see a lasting impact because of its use in this film.
Yeah.
The only, based off of that, I mean, and it makes sense. I think the only kind of thing is I do see this is a 10-year-old movie. And if you compare 2 years earlier, The Dark Knight, most consider to be the best comic book movie of all time. Like after the up close fight scenes are pretty brutal to watch now based off of what we've gotten over the last 12 years. That's the only part of that movie for me that really hasn't aged that well. It's kind of like when you're watching Batman fight, you're like, eh. But, and I feel like some things that they're doing here it absolutely influenced this genre of movies anyway. I don't think we were getting this really in this level of detail. And we were talking before we came on about, the fight coordinator, going to be working on some Marvel movies and some other big properties. And that just makes me so happy because I feel like he was obviously ahead of his time 11 years ago. So
you said 10 years that this was really interesting with this film. And I'm going to merge this into my discussion on longevity a bit, since that's our next category.
Mm-hmm.
It's right at 10 years. So it's at that very fresh, most films at that 10-year mark that we look at or that we've experienced are just starting to degrade around the 10 years. If it degrades, that's about where we see it happening. What I'm interested in seeing, and this will explain why I got my longevity score, which is 14,000, by the way. What's interesting to me for longevity is what happens over the next 10 years. Because when things are in this element, so indie music is a good example because that's what this whole film is full of. Indie music is always way ahead of its time, so that after time passes, it feels like it could be played right now. You listen to any one of these songs, you could probably hear them on the radio, and most people aren't going to know that it's not 10 years old.
Right.
But indie music has that kind of effect or that kind of characteristic. And this film is in that category. It's a little bit ahead of its time, so that 10 years has passed, it feels like it could have happened right now. I'm really interested in seeing what happens to this film over the next 10 years when that characteristic starts fading and we get into a new generation watching and listening and creating things. So 14,000 is where I landed with longevity, but that's really high. This thing's either going to do one of two things over the next few years. It's either going to go higher than 14 or it's going to start dropping lower. And I'm really interested in seeing where it goes. So this may be a reconciliation topic here in the next few years, Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see what you're saying. I agree with you. I tend to think, so I'm not far off from you, but I tend to think it's going to go up as time goes, because the music could potentially feel dated in some time. That's like a potential weak point. I don't know that it will be. That's like one of the very few that I think could end up in enough time being a drawback on this. But I think it is also fitting to the film. I don't watch, some of the absolute classics from, 60s, 70s, 50s, 40s, whatever, and think, man, this music's too old, right? Like, it fits the story, it fits the feel of the film. And I think we're kind of in that space here, but we'll see how that goes as time goes. The only other thing that I think could feel out of place in enough time is there's like a few small references here and there that I really don't think are important. Like the way he talks about email as like a weird thing that he didn't know existed, kind of, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a couple of those things, but I think those are very easy to gloss over. On the other side, the comic and gaming references, basically timeless. I mean, they pretty much stick to the way comics are structured and to fighting games for the most part. And those haven't changed in 40 years, really, or longer. The Zelda stuff and a couple other games that are mentioned, like Sex Bob-ombs and stuff, are timeless games that are never going to go away. They're still making them, and they're still considered like
Tetris.
Tetris, games that are foundational to that area of the world, right? Like, so I don't think those are going to go away. The humor, none of it was super topical or dateable, right? It was just funny humor. You smacking the highlights out of somebody's hair will be funny 50 years from now, right? That will always be funny. So I think a lot of this stuff has real staying power, but like you said, where it's tough to go up or down from here, because right at that 10-year mark, it's really hard to say specifically. I mean, it was the absolute lowest we would go on our cutoff for the show for a reason, right? Like we just couldn't go younger.
I think I'm surprised you guys didn't go a little lower, just because of the fact that it is only 10 years old and everything you're saying is true. I tend to agree with you though, Joe. I think it's going to get better, because the stuff that you typically, I judge a lot of these things off of, like when I show my daughter old movies that I liked, like from the 80s and things like that. And, you know, a lot of times stories will hold up, but where she'll, you know, if the synth music in like the Terminator or something is what she actually criticizes the most, right? I mean, that's, you know, and it's those little things. The beauty of this movie, I mean, the most dated thing in it was dated when they made it, from my point of view, is when he walks into the apartment and they got the Seinfeld music on, and that's a show that ended in the 90s, right? So it was like, and so like they're that's like the movie's in on the joke though, right? Where they have the sitcom, like the laugh track and everything.
I'll actually say Seinfeld. So I would say, right, Seinfeld was a thing that like ended in the 90s, and it was kind of like a little before me, primarily. Right? It was like before the age that I was old enough to really get it while it was on. But I mean, I've caught it in reruns, whatever. But I think maybe because of the news, the constant news of which streaming network gets to have it or whatever. I have family of friends who are in the like 20-ish year old range right now who love Seinfeld. Like I feel like it's right now in
it's like Friends. Everybody loves Friends.
Yeah,
you know, my kids watch Friends. You know.
Yeah, I feel like it I think deservedly so, has landed itself in one of those.
That kind of ties in, because even on the fashion side, one of the things that's come about, I feel like in the last 10 years, is this sort of, you know, kids are being empowered to be much more of who they are and dress the way they want to dress. And it's not like, if you look at pictures when we were kids of, here I am, oh, it's obviously the 80s based on the clothes I have on. Oh, it's obviously the 90s based on my Bugle Boy jeans. You know what I mean? It's like we were all wearing the same thing. The guys, if you watch, I got this scene was just on, like Wallace has on kind of a button-down shirt that like anybody who has a corporate job would wear, and then Scott's got, you know, ringer tees on, which I could go out wearing a ringer tee right now as a 45-year-old guy, and it would be completely socially acceptable. So I don't think you're going to see dated things there. And the other thing that they're kind of in on the joke that you could maybe say might date it, he uses phone booths, but everybody else has cell phones. He's the only one who uses a phone booth. So I kind of feel like it's much more to the point about like not knowing about the email. That isn't that email was maybe new at the time. It's just that Scott is clueless. It's kind of what it feels like. So I agree. I think over time it makes sense that this will be a category where it'll improve. But I think given it's only 10 years old, right? So you can only do what you can do with where we are.
Right. So yeah. So I had what did I have? I lost my place here. I had 14.5. What did you have?
I said 14. I had 13.5 is what I had.
So we're good at 14. 14 I think that's actually a really good place for it.
Yeah. Uniqueness. This thing is
it's 20K.
Definitely,
move on.
That's easy.
But this is, I mean, I'm kidding, but if it is like, this is where this movie should shine of any of these categories, I would think.
Yeah, I think so. I'll tell you mine first. I landed it right at the 3/4 mark. I put it at 15 flat. And just like music, and just like a little bit of what Joe was saying with narrative, what is pulling this down, because we're talking film, like we are looking at this with the blinders on for a film. So if it's based on existing written material, that's going to pull it down from uniqueness, because they pulled that directly adapted from the graphic novel. That was the biggest thing. Most of the stuff that I put in my uniqueness notes was building it up to the 15.
Yes,
like this thing has a lot of tropes, but they don't stand out because they create so many things visually that hit you with so much that they're not really tropes, and they're done intentionally. You know what I mean? I just think
commentary on the tropes more than being the tropes themselves.
Exactly right. Like what Colin said with the phone booth thing. You know, it's like it's all intentional in the whole grand scheme of this. And what really, to me, what bolsters the uniqueness is taking this from a graphic novel to screen, which is kind of interesting, because then you've got a chicken and the egg thing, right? This might be stuck in one of those limbo areas. If it didn't have the graphic novel, it would lose so much of what makes it up to where it's going to be in all these other categories, but that's the one thing that pulls it down a little bit.
And we may have done this. We may have, because High Fidelity was an adapted one too. But so if anybody's listening and you can tell us that we had the same conversation a year ago. I'm getting old. But the but it's an Oscar category, adapted screenplay. You know, I don't know why it should be dinged based off the source material.
Here, though. Yeah, we hate the Oscars here. We hate.
Well, my point is, it's like it's generally there's a lot of adapted works, right? You know, and some of the like people throw movies like The Shining or things like that out there that's that's adapted. So I could see why having it be original maybe earns it a little bit more, but I don't know if it's like $5,000 more, That's all I got.
Well, so the adapted screenplay does take a pretty good bite out of this, right? It does, because when we look at this category does, being 15 out of 20 instead of 20 out of 20 does not comment on the quality of the film. It comments solely on the uniqueness of the film, right? And being an adapted screenplay, think of how you would view this film if there was no graphic novel and this movie came out exactly like this, based entirely on the writing room for this film. You would be like, it would be amazing, right? You would be, this is wild. Where did he come up with the idea for this, right? There would be a lot of heft put into this film because of it, because of just how spectacular an achievement it was all at once. But you do have the graphic novel. It did get its ideas from somewhere, and that does play in. The other thing too that we look at on uniqueness, which I think these are smaller, they're little bits, they're smaller bites, right? As much as I love the, we talked about this with Tarantino. Much as I love the styling, I'm gonna give more uniqueness to Edgar Wright's, like very Edgar Wright style. Like I identified Edgar Wright in like 6 minutes in this film, right?
Yeah.
I would have given if we did this for Shaun of the Dead or something really early in his career, he'd get a bunch of unique points. But it's like a third film. He's got some time under his belt. This gets a little less love for those things because he's been doing them. Right now, it's not.
Yeah, you're not taking off thousands of points.
No,
for that.
It's not a huge
it's just
thing.
Something
It's
that's
just a
making
consideration,
you
right?
That makes more sense to me than the source materials. I kind of look. I think it's a little subjective because I hear what you're saying, but also I feel that if you look at a comic book that looks like this and then to be able to translate it the way they did, I think that's impressive because I think there's a lot of bad adaptations out there. A lot of people, go ahead.
The other thing I think you're looking at this is we're taking $5,000 away, $5,000 away.
You are. It's $5,000. Right? I want it back.
You need to look at it this way. Put it in this context. A $10,000 flat is a total neutral film. Like it's competent, it's good, it's
fine.
It's fine. It does all the things, and you're not necessarily. It's not a bad film,
yeah,
right?
No. I get it. It's perspective on your rating system. I got it. Okay,
we're giving points for.
I didn't
things.
drink my Ovaltine.
we're adding money. We're adding money towards getting certain things, and we just didn't add anything in that category, in that part of this, because it was an adapted screenplay. So it didn't get points, it didn't get dollars there because of that. And that I'm curious now. Just
let me put it into perspective for you. So I had what did you have, Joe, on uniqueness? I had 15.
I had 15 also, right, dead flat.
So if we hold that at 15, let me put this in a little bit larger perspective. And Colin, I think you may be really surprised. Individually, it might feel different. But when we sum this up, that's $73,000 for this particular film. Wow, and if we look at the definitive list, and I roll off the top 20, actually I'm going to do the top 20. I'm going to go 20 to 26 because we have a couple of ties here. Number 20 is The Matrix. 21, Princess Bride. 22, and there's a tie for 22 at The Searchers and Aliens. And then this comes in at 24. So if you think about the comparison, and those are all done individual from each other. If you think about the comparison of Scott Pilgrim, and this is tied with Titanic, all right? And we tried to be as fair as possible with Titanic. But this is tied at 24, coming in on the definitive list and the top 25 of some amazing films. It actually beat No Country for Old Men, which that's got a music issue that really hurt it. But This is leading the chart. I am really surprised once we broke this down at how high this landed. But that's the whole point of this podcast. We want to look at these individual films, look at these individual categories for all these films, and see, is there some appreciation that some of these films aren't getting? And yeah, Almost Famous, Scott Pilgrim, those are the types of films that people might overlook when they talk about the greatest of all time.
You know, while we're looking at this list here, and you just drew out the total there, and I know we discussed this ahead of time and did not do this, but I'd like to propose a live on the fly change here, Josh, if you're interested.
Let me hear what you got first.
I think we should have a special category.
All right.
I think they should have a $5 "No, My Heart Will Go On" category just so it can get above Titanic.
Okay, so
can we just rule that Titanic should be barred from the list? I think.
We get a couple of good films this year. It's going to be gone because that puts Titanic at 25. That puts Scott Pilgrim at $73,005. Solid number 24 now.
Yeah, I listened to your Titanic episode. There was a lot of sort of, what's the word? Hesitant wording of yeah. Well, I mean, you're like, we got to give it this because of certain things, but not because we necessarily want to.
Kicking and screaming is what
that was a great exact opposite example of the one I usually have to give, where I really like a film, but I have to be overly critical of it because,
but like this one, it was hard to land at 73,000 because I wanted to give it more.
I wanted to give it a lot more because, and the same thing, if you had let me rate Galaxy Quest on my own, y'all would have a new number one for sure, right?
It is, but I actually like the way you guys described it too. Of like, if you basically, 10 is sort of the point, and then you go like lower or higher. I was kind of coming at it as, okay, if you start at 20, which is a perfect score, where do you ding it, right? What do you take away from that? So I kind of like the way you guys are describing it better than that. But I would say too, of the movies you described, its neighbors. I think I wouldn't say this should make it go up or down the list. I just like, what movie would you want to watch? If I said, hey, look, here are the movies you could watch. And I think 8 times out of 10, I'd probably be like, oh, we're going to watch Scott Pilgrim. And I love The Matrix. You know what I mean? Like,
that's exactly
it's
right.
It's not even close most of the time.
Right.
Yeah,
but then
exactly right.
when you look at some of the things that play in there though, right? Like The Matrix did some stuff in technique.
Totally.
That was famous. Like groundbreaking. Right, changed industry kind of stuff. So if you look at it, actually break it down outside of that, this film does really favorably against The Matrix. Besides technique, where it
got a couple thousand more,
where The Matrix really pulls away there, and we've talked about that before. Other films where there are films that are just critically really great, but I don't want to watch them. They're like. Yeah. Whether they're emotionally heavy or they're really long, whatever it might be, there's just an aspect of that film that is just, I don't want to sit through it a bunch. We gave Titanic actually got kind of, I think we kind of smashed Titanic in a couple of categories, maybe even a little bit heavy. I don't know. But
you can't go heavy enough with smashing Titanic.
But like some of the stuff, like longevity on Titanic, I don't like that, and I never want to watch it. But you can't argue that it hasn't become like pervasive everywhere, right? Like it's like that thing's all over the place.
Yeah.
Some of the technique on Titanic, the scale of things in that, I don't really want to reward it, but I really have to if I want to have integrity.
Oh, the boat sinking is incredible.
Yeah,
that's go watch that on YouTube and skip the rest. That's how
it is. Exact Titanic analysis is the exact opposite of this one. I wanted to give more to this one, and I wanted to give less to Titanic, but hey, they came out nearly the same. But not good enough because Scott Pilgrim just overtook Titanic with $73,005. Joe, the guest list, Joe, is pretty similar when it comes to what the definitive list, at least that range from 20 to 25, 26, because those are all guest films that we were talking about in that.
Yeah, and it ends up, for the most part, so it ends up coming in between, right below Princess Bride, right above Titanic, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
number 8 on the guest list.
Yep. Which I think is a pretty good spot for it. I think,
considering we have 26 guest films, that's a really good spot.
Yeah, it's a really, really great spot. It's like definitely towards the top of the list there. And, looking at that, it even kind of stacks up favorably to Princess Bride, except for longevity, which I think is like one of our highest longevity to date so far.
Yeah. Yeah. And we'll see with Scott Pilgrim over the next few years how that
totally could work its way up there. Yeah.
Well, very cool. I'm surprised to see it on there. I like where it's at. And I like that we actually got to do this one. This was a really interesting review. I honestly, this is, I texted Colin
as I was finishing my first viewing. This
great.
This made it into my personal top 10. For
nice.
sure. I like I said, the vibe of this film is purpose built for me, right? If you took a cross section of my interests and the things I like and listen to and read about, like that stuff, this is really on it. I got like a kind of, even though I'm pretty sure this is predates Ready Player One, I did get a Ready Player One vibe out of the One Up.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
right. Like I'm fairly certain this predates the novel too.
It does. Yeah.
Yes. Which cool, right? Like this was definitely like built for me, and it's so much fun, and I really enjoyed doing the episode. Like I very rarely watch a film 4 times for a show. I just couldn't. I had it on while I was working out. I had it on while I was doing some other stuff. I watched it twice, like me in a notebook, just staring at the TV. And like you said, it's so easy to get wrapped up in the film and realize you haven't taken a note in 25 minutes, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure.
So like
it does all of those things, you mentioned that kind of check all the boxes for you and your interests. And this is why, like I said, if you do the definitive comic book movie rankings of like, if you were going to recommend a movie to someone who doesn't usually watch this, I feel like this is the movie, because you don't have to know any of that and still just be completely and just enjoy this movie. And I think that's sort of, I think MCU gets credit for like, oh, you don't have to be a comic book nerd and you can still enjoy this, which I think is true to a certain extent. I feel like, but this is just, if you just said, hey, there's this kind of weird, quirky movie that's really funny and visually like stimulating, you should watch it, you wouldn't. And if you have no interest in video games or comics, you wouldn't care. It's that just entertaining. And I think that's one reason I kind of appreciate it so much, because it hits so many, personal notes for me, like you're saying, Joe, but it's just a fun ride, and that's where, I think that's where it deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah. Well, I definitely appreciate you picking it, because I honestly probably could have gone forever without watching it if I hadn't done it for the show, So
you wouldn't have seen the gorilla beat the double-headed dragon. I mean, that was
so
like
awesome.
The truth.
So awesome.
That's part of the movie.
Joe, as we mentioned earlier, part of our Patreon subscription is the various tiers that you can sign up for. And,
yes.
and a couple of those tiers includes, getting a film of your choice appraised by Joe and me. We have a few of those already in the queue, and the first one up is Mr. Fluhart. So, Joe, I understand you actually have a clip from the film that he's requested. I wonder if you could fire up the soundboard and let's hear that clue.
Let's do it.
Well, I was standing in line at the post office yesterday, and I'm looking around, and everybody's looking really pathetic. You know what I mean? Like, people are, like, got drool just sort of stable, and then, like, this guy's bending over. You could see the crack of it. It was just, like, wife beaters. Anyway, it was... And I realized I just want to do it, you know what I mean? I mean, it sounds good and all, but I just have to confront the fact that I really don't like the people I've been talking about helping out. You know what I'm saying? I don't think I like people, period. I mean, you guys are okay. I'm just trying to be honest about being a misanthrope.
So you're not going to go to law school? What do you want to do then?
I want to dance.
All right.
That's a great one. That's a fun one.
That's a good choice.
That one's filmed here, and that one was filmed here in the town that I live, Austin, Texas. So I am very familiar with that one. In fact, we've been to a few of the spots where they filmed it. The little drive-in, not the drive-in theater, but the drive-in, the place where they order hamburgers and stuff. Mm-hmm. We've actually eaten there.
Yep.
Horrible food. Now this should be a good one. I'm excited about this one.
I'm excited to hear you guys talk about it. I think that's a fun movie, and I've had a bit of a Linklater role this year. I never watched the Before franchise, and so I plowed through those.
So good. That first one.
I went back to back because I'm like, well, I want to see what happens next, and so that was a really interesting way to watch those movies. I really always thought of him more of School of Rock and Dazed and Confused. I'd seen Boyhood too, but yeah, this will be a good choice for you guys. I'm excited to hear that episode for sure.
Well, Colin, we do appreciate you being on the show today. You're always welcome, but please tell the folks where they can find you and the content that you're creating.
Well, yeah, I'm excited, and hopefully, listen, guys, it's 2021, which means the movie Goon turns 10 years this year. So I
forgot about that. Yeah.
I don't think I'm
nice.
I won't make you do it.
Oh,
I want to be invited back on after the next time I'm on. So, but it's a good guilty pleasure movie, everybody. Now, you can find my podcasts with 20 Minutes of Truth. We're on a bit of a hiatus because I'm actually working on a larger podcast project that I can't really talk about yet, which is exciting, but I'm going to try and get a few new episodes of that out. Movies I Missed still exists. I've actually been kind of trying to fold them one in. It's I don't know why I've started multiple podcasts. Just sort of like seems like it's a terrible idea, but it was fun at the time.
Because you're a podcaster. That's what we do. We just
Joe,
keep
you know what I'm
podcasts.
talking about.
Yeah.
So the backlog there is great. The last one I did, which actually went up on the 20 Minutes of Truth feed, is Taxi Driver, where I make the case that was the original anti-hero superhero movie, and how dare you, Martin Scorsese, for disparaging comic book movies in 2020. And that's what I've got going on right now. Next episode of 20 Minutes of Truth should be out sometime, maybe the beginning of February. We're going to be talking about digital transformation. So very adult topic for me. So check that out. Please subscribe and get me some feedback for everybody.
Yeah, no, you love your stuff. I really enjoyed the generation gap discussions you have with
my daughter.
With your daughter. Those are sometimes eye-opening and sometimes very expected, but it's very entertaining.
It's just getting her to sit down, watch the movie, and then record the podcast. And true to it being a kid, every time we do it, she goes, "That's fun. Let's do another one." And then I can't get her to do another one for like 6 months. So it's hopefully I'm working on Terminator and Terminator 2 would be that's what I want to do with her. Hopefully sometime in the next few months. So
very cool. Well, if you want to find the Film Appraisers online, social media, whatnot, our Twitter is @FAppraisers. Our Instagram is @FilmAppraisers. Email filmappraisers@gmail.com. Our website, eargluemedia.com/TFA. You can also go to eargluemedia.com/Discord for your personal invite to our Discord server. Talk to Colin, talk to Joe, talk to me. Everyone's there. Merchandise we'll put in the show notes, and we'll also put our Patreon page link in the show notes as well. Really easy. I believe that's patreon.com/filmappraisers.
Yes, awesome. And definitely while you're on there, don't forget to jump on to iTunes and rate, review the show. It helps a lot, means a lot.
All right, folks, that is going to do it for us on this episode of the Film Appraisers. Thank you all for listening, and goodbye.
The Film Appraisers was created by Josh McCrae, produced by Joe Kane and Josh McCrae, graphics by Albert Padilla, and voiceover by Morgan Marshall.
The thoughts, expressions, views, opinions, and the like are those of the guests and the host of the Film Appraisers and do not represent the opinions of any entity associated with the creation or distribution of the films discussed herein.